Okay, we are on chapter 4 of Chuju's house. One place was as dark as another. After many stumbles, my feet discovered the smoothness of a path. Following the path until I believed I was far enough from the river, I huddled down to wait for the morning. All about me was the rustle of leaves twitching in the warm breeze. Comforted by the small lights of my fireflies, I fell asleep. I was shaken awake by a girl no older than myself. Her face was very round and her eyes were very large. Her hair stood up in 2 large tufts tied with string. "You must be new," she said. "If Jirong finds you asleep, he will beat you. Where is your shoulder pole?" "I have no shoulder pole. Who is Jirong?" I saw that the baskets on her shoulder pole were heaped with small green leaves. I looked around at the long rows of trees. "Why are you plucking leaves? Do these trees have no fruit?" The girl stared at me. "How stupid you are. These are mulberry trees. They are not wanted for their fruit." At last I understood. Somewhere close by must be the silkworms that fed on the leaves. I gave up my hope of gathering fruit and said, "I need to find work. Will this Jirong hire me to gather leaves?" "You would be a fool to work for him if you did not have to." She rolled up her sleeve to show me ugly black and blue marks. "Why do you stay?" "I was sent to work here by an orphanage. If I tried to leave, he would come after me and punish me. Anyhow, where would I go? Here I have a bed and food, and at the end of each month, a few yuan." My thoughts flew to Hua.
Yuan?
Money. My thoughts flew to Hua. Had I not left, one day she might have been sent from an orphanage to work for someone like this Jirong. "I must have work," I said. "Is there no place else?" The girl gathered up her shoulder pole and she pointed away from the rising sun. "Over there is the place of the silkworms. There is work there, but I would rather have Jirong's beatings than the tongue lashings of the woman." Before I could ask a further question, she hurried away. I had borne Nene's scoldings and did not see why I could not bear the scoldings of this woman. I hurried off in the direction the girl had pointed, passing several girls my age and even younger, going from tree to tree to gather leaves. If it had not been for their shoulder poles, they could have been playing some game of hide and seek among the trees. I thought the trees would never end, but I came... It's like a pole that's on their shoulder holding baskets. Like, if it's across your shoulder, it can put baskets on each side.
All those.
I thought the trees would never end, but I came at last to a long, low building. A doorway stood open. From inside the building came a noise such as I had never heard before. I peered inside. Covering long tables were trays of green leaves, and chewing the leaves were thousands of fat white worms. It was their chewing that I had heard. Moving among the tables were women dressed in white smocks, white masks tied around their faces. A hand reached out and pushed me outside so hard that I fell to the ground. A woman was standing over me. I could not believe so small a woman could give so great a push. Like the girls, she wore a white smock and also a mask, which was tied about the lower half of her wrinkled face. She was old and shriveled, as if all the air had been squeezed out of her. Her gray hair was pulled into a knot on the top of her head, and her narrowed eyes looked at me as Nene had looked upon a cockroach that had crept by night into our rice flour. A moment later, the cockroach was dead. In a whisper, she hissed, "You are polluting my worms. How dare you try to come into the building?" "Please, I need a job. Could I tend the worms?" "Never. You would poison my worms with your fishy smell." "That is only because I lived on a fishing boat. I could clean myself." Her eyes narrowed even further. "I could not pay you. A bed in the dormitory with the other girls and food. That is all." "A bed and food and safety for a bit." I nodded my head. "Sit outside, well away from the building," she ordered. "When the girls stop for lunch, I will send one to show you where to go. Scrub yourself and get back here at once. No garlic. My worms don't like it." She caught sight of my jar of fireflies and she snatched it out of my hand and flung it away. With horror, I watched it land on a rock and break into pieces. "What? You would bring dirty bugs near my beauties? There had better be no more stupidities or I will turn you over to the police. Doubtless you have run away after some mischief." When she left me, I settled down in a bit of shade and made by a small stand of bamboo. I did not think the woman would call the police as long as I would work for her without a wage. The sound of the thousands of chewing worms was very loud. All those little mouths at work frightened me. However much I was in want of food and a bed, I did not think I could live each day with such chewing noises. Small as the worms were, they sounded as if they would eat anything in their way. The sun was overhead when the girls came out of the building, pulling off their masks and smocks and reaching for pickles and bowls of rice passed to them by a woman who had come loaded with baskets. The day had been hot and the faces of the girls ran with sweat. One girl hurried over to me, a pigtail bouncing on her back as she ran. In age, she was nearly a woman. Her smile was friendly, but she urged me to run alongside her. "I am Song Su. Quickly, I must get back or Young will scold me. The worms should be in their 4th hatch today, but they are slow. That always makes Young cross." "What do you mean, 4th hatch, and why does that make her cross?" Song Su opened a door into a long hut built of wood and roofed with metal. It was so hot inside I could scarcely breathe. You'll soon learn, she said. The worms eat until they are too fat for their skin. They break out of the skin and start eating again. We starve while the worms get so fat their skin can't hold them. 4 times the worms molt, and then they spin the cocoon that makes the silk. This is the dormitory. The shower is in that room. Take any bed that does not have some belongings on the chest that sit next to it. No makeup. The worms don't like the smell. She ran off. I was happy for the shower's cold water. I scrubbed myself well for the worms and ran back to the building as fast as I could. The fish smell is gone, Young said, but you could not scrum away the stupid look of a country girl. She thrust a mask and a smock at me. I struggled into the smock and clumsily tied the mask about my face. Young pulled me over to a table and handed me a feather. In a whisper, she said, "These sweethearts are yours. They are a little slow in hatching. You must tickle them with the feather like so." She brushed the feather over one of the worms and then another. Seeing her gentleness with the worms, I found it hard to believe she was the same woman who had given me such a push. "Mind you don't miss a single worm or you will not hear the end of it. And no talking. Noise distracts the worms." I looked quickly around me. There were 5 other girls with feathers. All afternoon I tickled the fat white worms as they lay on a bed of chopped mulberry leaves, chewing away. Baskets of the leaves were brought in to replace the ones that were eaten. Once I thought I saw a girl who had awakened me come in with leaves. I tried to catch her eye, but she hurried off. It was late in the afternoon when one of the girls raised her hand to signal Yang, who ran quickly over to the girl's tray. Another hand was raised. I saw one of my worms break out of its skin and raised my hand as well. Young examined the worm and nodded her head. One by one, the worms wriggled out of their skins. Once freed, the worms began to wave their heads from side to side, spinning a thin thread and wrapping it around their bodies. I had hated the ugly worms, but now I was fascinated. Here was the silk. By the end of the day, all but a few of the worms were spinning their cocoons.
So their skin makes the silk?
Yep. Well, the cocoon is the silk.
Oh.
The feathers were put away, and we busied ourselves with cleaning the trays, for what went into the worms also came out of them. It had rained all afternoon, so returning to the dormitory was like swimming through warm water. Little puffs of steam rose from the ground. We hurried through our supper of rice, bean paste, and cabbage, for the dormitory building was so hot no one could bear to stay inside. Outdoors, we sat fanning ourselves with leaves from a dying banana tree. Beyond the dormitory and the worm farm, the rows of mulberry trees were silent in the still air. I sat with Song Su and with Jing, the girl who had awakened me. Also with us was Ling Lai. As soon as we had come back to the dormitory, Ling Lai had put on lipstick and eyeshadow. Her jeans were low on her slim hips and allowed her navel to show. What would my Baba say to that? The women in the spinning room were older than we were and kept to themselves. I whispered to Jing, who sat beside me, "Look how red those women's hands are." "They put the cocoons into hot water to loosen the thread, and then they pull the thread," Jing said. "The water is so hot I don't see how the women stand it, but they say they are used to it." "Now that the worms are spinning their cocoons, will Young be less cross?" I asked. "Oh no," Sung Su said. "This is the worst time of all, for in 3 days the cocoons will be spun, and all but a few of the worms must die. Young will be very upset. We hate the spinning of the cocoons." "Why must the worms die?" "If they live, they will crawl out of their cocoon, making a hole in it. After that, no long thread can be drawn." Ling Li said, "The killing of the miserable worms is my favorite time. I must live with the worms all day long, and at night I dream of them. They cannot die quickly enough for me. Last week I had to carry baskets of the worms into the town to sell. The owner of the restaurant said, 'Oh, here comes the worm girl. That is all we are, worm girls.'" "But why would you take the worms to a restaurant?" I asked. "They are a delicacy, fried crisp on the outside and soft as custard on the inside. Young hates it that we sell her worms. The manager of the silk farm makes her do it because they bring good money." "Did you come from the same orphanage Jing came from?" I asked Ling Lai. "Yes, most of us did. The orphanage is not far from here, and the manager of the silk farm and the manager of the orphanage have an agreement. As soon as we are 16, we are sent to some job. I was sent at 15, for the orphanage is so crowded they are anxious to get rid of us." "Is there no place else for you?" I asked. "A few of the girls, when they are young, are taken away by Wagyorin, remember that's foreigners, who come across the ocean to adopt them," Song Su said. "But those are few." I told them my story of Hua and why I had run away. Jing sighed. "I only wish someone had run away from me so I could have stayed with my family. But what difference does it make whether it was Hua or you who ended up here?" "The orphanage manager put you here," I said. "An orphanage would have put Hua in such a place as well. No one put me here. I came by myself and I can go." "Where can you go?" Song Su asked. "It's dangerous for a girl traveling alone. Only last month we heard how a girl who ran away was kidnapped. Girls are sold to men who are in need of wives. So many baby girls have been lost. There are more men than women." I could not say where I would go, for I had no idea. I only knew that I would not be a worm girl all my life. What Song Su had said was true. The next morning, Yang was in a terrible temper. Once the worms had spun their cocoons, the cocoons were carried away to a room where they were heated so the worms inside them died. Only a few worms were allowed to hatch and lay eggs so there would be more worms. Young watched as the trays of cocoons were carried off. "Ah, my beauties," she moaned. She ordered us to scrub the floors and the tables so that they would be ready for the next shipment of worms. No matter how hard we scrubbed, we could not please her. There were no worms now, so Young had no need to hiss and whisper her words. "Song-Su," she shrieked, "you have left your dirty footprints on the freshly scrubbed floor. Do it over. Chu-Ju, none of your filthy country ways. The undersides of the tables must be as clean as the tops." The windows and walls were scrubbed as well, for there were always a chance that some worm disease would infect the new worms and they would perish. Ling Lai whispered, "I wish I knew of such a disease. I would spread it everywhere." When at last the new worms arrived, Young seemed almost cheerful. "Ah, look at the poor babies. They need fattening. Come, move quickly," she ordered us. "See that the leaves are thickly spread." Once more we heard the chewing. My days were chewed away as well in the long hours of caring for the worms. Ling Lai, Song-Su, Jing, and I became friends. After a workday was over, we would sit outside for the breezes. Chewing on sunflower seeds or sucking on pieces of sugar cane for the sweetness, we would tell one another our worries and our hopes. When Young shouted and scolded one of us, we could be sure the others would sympathize, making faces behind Young's back. We called Young Mouth of 1,000 Serpents. We also had a name for Ji Rong, Biting Dog. Ling Li let us try her makeup, and Song-Su let me try on her jeans. There was no talk of families, for the orphanage girls had no memories of Mama or Papa. I never mentioned my own family, for I did not want to speak of what they did not have. But often I thought of my own Mama and Papa and of Hua. She would be taking her first steps. I wondered if I would still recognize her. The dormitory sheltered me, but it was not the home I dreamed of. Though Young still scolded me each day, after a few months she saw that I was given a few yuan when the other girls received theirs. "You are as worthless as they are, so why should you not have what they have?" she said. After that I did not mind her scoldings as much. In February we celebrated the New Year, the year of the Golden Dragon. Night after night, fireworks were set off, the sky exploding into fiery flowers of color. Day after day, we heard the sound of the drums that accompanied the lion dances. People in their red clothes crowded into the shops to buy mandarin cakes and dumplings with little coins hidden inside. Young, reminding us that in preparation for the New Year, it is traditional to sweep and scrub, set us to cleaning the dormitory, then scolded us for making a poor job of it. Yet on the night when families gathered for the custom of eating a whole fish together, Young remembered we were orphans, and instead of our usual cabbage and rice, she provided us with a huge carp in a fragrant sauce. We spent money on lanterns, which we hung in the dormitory. As we tied on red ribbons and scarves and sat down to our feast as a family, I couldn't help thinking of Mama and Papa and wondering if they were celebrating the New Year. I wondered if they thought of me and if I had a brother. All my problems came about from a good deed. It was the 4th moon, and I had been with the worms for nearly a year. Though it was not the time of the rains, one afternoon a great storm came. There was lightning and thunder. Young paced up and down the aisles, peering into the trays, crooning to the worms. "Don't worry, my little ones. It is only a small storm, and it will pass away." The door opened, and I saw Jing hurry in. I thought she had come in with leaves for the worms, but her baskets were nearly empty. She crouched in one corner of the room, a frightened look on her face. Before Young could say anything, the door opened, and Biting Dog burst into the room, grabbed Jing, and pulled her outside into the storm. At dinner time, Jing sat by herself with her head down. She would not look at us. In the evening, I heard her crying softly in the cot next to mine. When I asked what was wrong, she only shook her head and cried harder. I sat beside her and waited. Finally, the crying stopped and Jing sat up. On her cheek was an evil-looking black and blue mark. When the lightning and thunder came, she said, "I was afraid to be under so many trees, but Biting Dog said the worms must eat and the leaves must be collected. I ran away and he came after me and he beat me with a stick." "Jean, do you think the orphanage knows that Biting Dog beats the girls?" She shook her head. "No. When the people from the orphanage come to inspect the worm farm, everyone here is very nice to us. That is all the orphanage sees. The next time they come, you should tell the orphanage people the truth. We are never allowed to talk with anyone from the orphanage. We are watched every minute." "Then you must write a letter to the orphanage," I said. "How am I to do that?" Jing looked sadder than ever. "We were never taught to write at the orphanage. They said we'd be workers and we would have no need." "I'll write the letter for you," I promised. "Young and Biting Dog will never know who sent it." But when I said that, I stupidly forgot that it would be no secret to them that no one from the orphanage could write. A writing of the letter was a great thing. Only the 4 of us knew of it, and together we made our plans. After dinner, we hurried along the paths of the squawking crows to the nearby village. The village was a small affair of dirt streets and stalls. There was a tea house where old men sat playing checkers. Many of the men had brought their bird cages, and the birds fluttered about, beating their wings against the wire caging. A melon peddler cried his wares, means sold his things, his melons, and there was a noodle shop and a stall where bicycles were repaired. We headed for the small store where Ling Lai got her makeup. After much consultation, we bought paper, an envelope, and a stamp. That night, we huddled together in a corner of the dormitory. The girls watched as I brought out my pencil and notebook, and I waited to hear what I should say. Tell them about the poor food, Ling Lai said. Tell them about the heat of the dormitory, Song Su said. And the beatings, from Jing. When the letter was written, it was passed from hand to hand, and for a few minutes, as if each of the girls wished to have some part in the writing of the letter. They made me read it to them again and again. Honored orphan manager, all is not well here at the silk farm. We have no meat or fish to eat, only rice and cabbage, and sometimes bean paste and pickles. The dormitory has no breeze that comes into it, only heat. Worst of all, Young scolds us all day and Ji Rong beats us. Please come and let us show you the black and blue marks. The orphans. The letter was sealed carefully in an envelope, each one of us licking a bit of the flap. The next evening we returned to the town, and after looking all about us to be sure no one from the silk farm was watching, we mailed the letter. All week we waited, hardly daring to look at one another, and with each angry look from Young, we were sure she had discovered what we had done. At the end of the week, an orphanage worker came. She was as big as a man, so she towered over Young and even Biting Dog, but her voice was kind. When she looked at us, she did not smile with her mouth, but she smiled with her eyes, and none of us were afraid of her. Though Young and Biting Dog complained loudly and said the girls were sure to be untruthful, one by one the woman called all the girls from the orphanage to talk with her. Young and Biting Dog were not allowed to hear what was said. After the orphanage worker left, Ling Li whispered, I told her of the bugs in the cabbage. She saw for herself how hot the dormitory was, Song Su said. I showed her my black and blue marks, Ying said, and she was very angry. After that, the food was better, a fan was put in the dormitory, and Biting Dog only growled and no longer struck the girls. Young was furious that such a letter had been sent, but she could not find out from the orphanage who sent it, and she did not dare to punish all of us for fear there would be another visit from the orphanage worker. If the orphanage sent the girls somewhere else, the silk farm would be in trouble, for where could they get such cheap labor? Still, Young knew the orphans could not read, and she watched me closely. Read or write. One day she came to me and with a crafty look said, I don't have enough time to keep track of the number of worms we get. Here is a notebook. You can put down the day the worms come and the number of worms. If you are careful with the records, I might pay you a larger wage. I shook my head. I cannot write, Young. I said, I am only a stupid country girl. She gave me a suspicious look but said nothing more. That night I found my pencil box had been stolen from my chest. I truly hated Young and longed to go near her and demand that she return it, but I had told her I could not write. The next day, as soon as I entered the worm room, Young said to me, we have more girls than we need. You must leave at once. You can go back to the country. Doubtless you can find a job cleaning out pig pens. It is all you are suitable for. Song Su and Ling Li were watching. I longed to bid them Zai Zhan, and that is farewell, I think. Yeah, farewell. But Young forbade me to speak to anyone. As I reached the door, Song Su and Ling Li ran to me and put their arms around me until Young hissed at them to return to their worms. When I went to the dormitory to get my bundle of clothes, I was amazed to find the pencil box. Young had returned it. I thought I had seen into Young as far as a person could go, but I had not. There was yet a bit of heart of her in her, so when I left, I was not quite so afraid for my friends. And that's chapter 4 of Chuju's house.